Thank you for joining today's webinar on public pension expenditures and its impact on education spending and other priorities. My name is Hank Kim, and I'm NCPERS Executive Director. Today's program is part of our Center for Online Learning, which provides remote continuing education to public pension trustees, staff, and other fiduciaries and stakeholders. Today's webinar will review the recently released report, Do Pension Expenditures Impact Education Spending? In the report, NCPERS Director of Research, Dr. Michael Kahn, examined state-by-state historical data on pension contributions, education expenditures, revenues, and the economy. This analysis found that looking at the 26-year period from 1993 to 2019, education funding grew at 3 times the annual rate of pension spending. This defies the crowding out arguments made by some public pension critics. Dr. Kahn brings more than 30 years of research experience in public pensions and its interaction with tax and the economic policies. After his retirement from the National Education Association, he joined NCPERS in 2014. Michael is responsible for the Public Pension Funding Forum, our annual program that examines the obstacles that stand in the way of closing public pension funding gap and explores new solutions to overcome those obstacles, including better risk management in economic cycles, use of new and improved debt instruments, and closing tax loopholes. As always, we encourage audience participation. Please submit your questions by using the Q&A function. Your questions will be answered near the end of this session. With that, Michael, the webinar is yours.
Thank you, Hank, and thank you, everybody who was on the webinar today. Before I get into today's topic, do pension expenditures impact education spending? I would like to say a few words about how today's topic fits into a grand scheme of pensions, grand scheme of things in our pension world, I should say. So there are 3 common misconceptions about public pensions. One is taxpayers cannot afford public pensions. The second one is public pensions are not sustainable given the majority have unfunded liabilities. And the third one is pension expenditures are crowding out funding of vital public services such as education and public safety. So I wanted to put these up front and begin to talk about what kind of research we have been doing to address some of these. And we'll also do a little bit of polling just to make this a little interactive. So first, with respect to the first misperception, is a study that we had done, unintended consequences. And this really deals with this whole issue of taxpayers can't afford public pensions. In fact, here, this study actually shows that the public pensions are net tax revenue generators. And the fact is that taxpayers can't afford not to have public pension because they'll have to pay more to receive the same level of services without, if there are no public pension. So we like to sort of do a poll on this and ask you, have you, read or heard claims that taxpayers cannot afford public pensions? So if you can answer those, and we come back with the results. Okay, so you saw why almost all of you have heard this before. So the second uh, misconception, let's see if I can move this, is we hear about the public pensions are not sustainable. Uh, so this study actually focuses on ways to enhance sustainability and sort of developing new ways to assess the health of public pensions. In fact, we had developed a new way of looking at it through a sustainability evaluation that can be used to make and keep public pensions sustainable. Uh, Actually, this year's public pension funding forum that Hank had mentioned before, it will be in August this year, will mainly focus, the whole program almost focuses on this subject. So we hope some of you would be able to attend our public pension funding forum. We'll talk a little bit more toward the end of the presentation. And the third misperception or misconception is that do pension expenditure impact, and people, you will read in the literature some studies coming out saying that public pensions are taking away money from public education. So we thought we look at this, and that's the topic of today uh, that we will go through. So we have looked at this question in four ways and did not find support for the assertion that pension expenditures are taking away resources from public education. Of course, all of us know there is a squeeze on resources, but it's not because of pension, but it's actually because of the way revenue systems are structured. So there's always, uh, you know, constraints on funding programs, not only pension, but all other programs. So there's a squeeze on resources, not because of pension, but because of the way state and local revenue systems are structured. So let's look at what are those. I mentioned four ways we have looked at this issue, and those four ways are: number one is annual rate of growth of education and pension expenditures. The second way we look at it, expenditures on education and pensions as a share of state and local revenues. And the third way to look at this issue is that uh, education, the pension funding is not usually part of education budget. In my, 20, almost 25 years of service at NEA, I was in charge of education finance program at NEA, and I know that from personal experience that pensions funding comes from a separate uh, legislative process, appropriation process. The last one we look at is the slopes of the trend lines of education funding and pension expenditures using best fit linear regression equations. So we'll go through all four of these, and then we would, as I mentioned, the bigger problem is the way the revenues are structured that we need to address. We'll talk about that toward the end. So the first way was to look at the annual growth in pension and education expenditure. This is year-to-year fluctuation. As you can see, the blue line, that's the pension annual growth. Sometimes it was below zero. Sometimes it was way above, almost 30% annual increase. So you can, it's very volatile, fluctuating, whereas the sort of red line shows the annual growth in education expenditure. Not much, but it's been not that kind of zigzag, pretty stable compared to the pension expenditure. And the reason there's so much fluctuation in pension expenditures because sometimes employers will skip the payments. Sometimes they won't make the full amount needed, and sometimes make a catch-up contribution that they hadn't paid for a few years through either appropriation process or issuing uh, bonds to fill the funding gap. So as a result, we have to adjust if you want to compare the two average growth rate over this 25, 26-year period. We need to adjust this by the dispersion of these two variables, and that's exactly what we did. So when we adjust the uh, for the fluctuation or dispersion, and you can see education expenditure rose, the bar on the left-hand side, much bigger than the pension expenditure annual growth, the bar on the right-hand side. And uh, when we adjust for volatility, the average annual risk-adjusted rate of increase in education funding was about 2.48%, and and, and pension funding was 0.82, which is sort of education grew annually 3 times higher rate than the pension contributions grew over this period. So this is actually true for all states except for Missouri and Utah. I don't know why, but they were pretty close. They were sort of equal, not too far apart. But generally, all states, the situation is the same. Education funding adjusted for the dispersion uh, grew. I mean, the education funding grew faster than the pension contributions. So the second way we looked at it is the pension expenditure, uh, and the education expenditure as a percent, as a share of state and local revenues, own source revenues, which is basically the revenues that the state and local governments collect from their own, and not including the federal grants, things like that. So pensions consume about 3.6% on average during this study period, whereas share of education funding was 33.8%. So this is a much, much larger share going as a percent of state and local revenue going to education. So in this kind of situation, even if pension funding grows faster, unadjusted grows faster than the education expenditure. So the ratio between the two doesn't really change uh, at all. So we got the real data. This is the US Census Bureau information. So in this table, the first row uh, on the left-hand side, average expenditure as a percentage of revenue from 1993 to 29 was 3.58, which the previous slide mentioned, and the education expenditure was 33.8% of state and local revenue. So here the last column in this table is ratio, which we didn't need to do here, but the next row, second row, current expenditures in 2019. So we are going to look at the current situation and then project it one more year to look at if the ratio stays the same or not. And if it's the same, that means it's not taking away, pensions are not taking away money from education. So they're staying at the second row. In 2019, pension expenditures were about $118 billion. Education expenditures, state and local government, was $1.1 trillion. So the ratio between the two is 0.11 in the last column. Then we project that with the average annual unadjusted rate. So here we don't adjust for those fluctuations, that dispersion between the two variables. So pension expenditures here were 6.48%. Education expenditures grew 5.57% annual growth rate. And so the last column, then we project the 118 billion by 6.48. So in 2020, that should be 126 billion. We projected the education expenditures of 2019, 1.1 trillion by 5.57% annual growth rate. That turns out to be 1.18 trillion. And the ratio between the two is 0.11. So that's really, the ratio does not changing means pensions are not taking away any money from education. So the third way we looked at it, that pension expenditure are not usually part of education budgets, and so they can't really impact, let's say, classroom expenditures, claiming that pension expenditures are reducing class sizes. Money for class sizes is like saying increase in road construction budget or snow cleaning budget is impacting class sizes. So if they are not part of line item in the same budget, they're unlikely to impact each other. So pension expenditure are usually paid through separate appropriations, not within the foundation formula. Public education is funded through education foundation formula that aims at making sure that equity issues are addressed. So pension is not really part of that. And I thought I'd also look at number of state by percentage of total pension expenditures paid by the state. And here we mean the if it's the share paid by state out of total state and local contribution or expenditures. So you can see about 10 states, 100% of pension expenditures come from the state. In about 19 states, next bar, 90% of the money comes from the state. The next one, so you can see more than half, and the next 80%, about 9 states. So only 4 states toward the right, where less than 70% of the money comes from state. So these states pay really the lion's share of the pension expenditures. And then the fourth way we look at it is the best fit regression, linear regression line, taking the amount spent on pension and education. And here you can see the two lines, the slopes of the two lines are sort of going apart. If pensions were taking money from education, then they should be coming closer as they move to the right. So this one also sort of supports our hypothesis or our contention that the pensions are not really taking money away or don't crowd out the education funding that is so commonly misconceived. So we have look, how about other services? So here we have education uh, and let's see, pensions, uh, health, these triangles are health, public safety, the crosses. So you can see all of those lines stay above the pension expenditures. So our main focus was on education, but we looked at some other, and we don't find any evidence of crowding pensions crowding out other services. So after looking at this question of do pension expenditures impact education spending in 4 different ways, we find that they do not. While pension expenditures do not impact education funding, it does not mean that education is adequately and equitably funded. So we can't just be happy that it's not impacting, but education itself is an important service, and we would like it to be adequately and equitably funded. And lo and behold, the uh, you know state courts, in many cases, state supreme courts in 43 states have ruled that funding for public education is inadequate and inequitable. Uh, So, as I mentioned in the beginning, that there is a squeeze on state and local budgets, and that's due to the state and local revenue systems, the way they are structured, not because of pensions. Even if there were no pension, there will be still a squeeze. So here is just looking at as I mentioned in the beginning, we look at the tax structures, etc. And this chart shows uh, elasticity of state and local government revenue systems. And you can see elasticity means that if economy grows by $1, state and local revenues should grow by $1 too, or how much the state and local revenues grow. So uh, on the left-hand side, 2002, this is based because of the data that I had available for this analysis. You can see if the economy grows by $1, the state and local revenues grow by about 78 cents or so. Look on the left-hand side, the beginning of the graph on the left hand is below 80 cents. So if economy grows by $1, revenues grow by less than close to 78 cents. So you're missing a big chunk of the growth. So it goes over time. It went up a little bit in 2009, 10, went down. Right now, if economy grows by $1, the right-hand side where the graph ends, you can see the revenues grow only by about 71 or 72 cents. So we'll always be short. Like my daughter, when she was little, she used to say, our clothes will always be small for us because because she's growing. So that same thing happens in this case. Even if in good economic times, you still have not enough money. uh, so state and local revenue systems are actually out of sync with the economies, as you saw in the previous slide. And this graph also looks at the slopes of the economy line and the uh, revenue line. The top line, blue line, is economy, and the bottom line, revenue, that one is red, is the revenue line. And again, we use the linear regression equation to smooth out and draw the slopes of draw the lines and measure the slopes of these lines by beta value of these regression lines for each state. And this is for the United States as a whole. And you can see the economy grows, but the tax revenues don't grow as fast. So you're sort of, when the economy grows, the needs of people grow as well. The road, the bridges, the highways, all the infrastructure, the public safety needs. As the economy grows, these kind of needs grow, but the revenues don't grow. So we'll always be the revenues are always lagging the economic growth. So unless we bring revenue systems in harmony with the economy, squeeze on state and local resources will continue even if there were no pensions. Uh, so, the U.S., is the richest country in the world, and uh, we feel there are state and local government face many competing priorities like funding education, ensuring public safety, maintaining retirement plans to attract and retain qualified workforce. And I think we can afford both pensions and education, but to do so, we may have to bring our revenue systems in harmony with the economy. So at this point, I think we wanted to share with you resources that NCPERS has available, and also mentions something about our pension funding forum. I think we like to do another poll here to see if there is interest. Here we go. So we have 57%, so that's pretty good. We love to have you, and I think I am with that. I want to turn it over to Hank. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Oh, you're
Thank
welcome, Michael, and thank you for doing the research, putting the public pension funding forum together for us on an annual basis, and for today's webinar. Again, we do encourage audience participation, so if you have a question, please feel free to use the Q&A function on this platform. So, Michael, let me start off with a question to you. Obviously, you did a very thorough and compelling analysis of why pension spending does not compete with education expenditures. So how are critics of public pensions, how are they able to say the complete opposite? What are they looking at? and what are the fallacies of their analysis?
Most of the analysis that I have seen, and it's reviewed in our study, focuses on take education spending as a budget for a local or a state government. Suppose it's $100, and then they take at how much is being paid for pension contributions. So the assumption here is that the pension contribution is coming from the education budget, and that's not true. And the second thing is they don't take into account the fluctuations of the pension contributions over time. And the fluctuations are so big that it distorts the mean, the average for comparison purposes. So, you may have heard a joke, a statistician, he said, the average depth of the river is only 3 feet. So he drowned. He wanted to, and that's what's happening on the other side. So the average is much higher. They calculated without taking the dispersion. And even in the pension investment arena, nobody compares average returns of two investments without taking into account the volatility of each investment. So this is the same principle that we need to apply to make a case that the pension funding is taking money away from education. That's how they come up with these assertions and misrepresentation.
Great. Well, thank you, Michael, for that clarification. I don't see any other questions in the queue. So if you do, if you do read the report and have any questions, please feel free to follow up with us at info@ncpers.org. So with that, let me thank everyone for joining today's webinar. Let me thank Michael for his wonderful presentation. And our next webinar is scheduled for June 13th, and it will be on BlackRock's U.S. Public Pension Peer Risk Study. In the meantime, as Michael mentioned, we look forward to either seeing you at the Public Pension Funding Forum in August or in 2 weeks at the annual conference and exhibition ACE in New Orleans. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.